you once again for coming along. This evening we're going to look at the biggest problem that humanity faces in the next several decades and perhaps centuries, but basically it's the problem of the transition away from what we become dependent upon as a species. Certainly as a civilization, and maybe as a species, our civilization is in effect motorized, driven by the consumption of non-renewables, and in particular fossil fuels. And the largest consumers of fossil fuels are now both the United States and China. In the United States, we've lost the direction and momentum that had been building against the heightened consumption of fossil fuels. And in a recent election, you may recall, we in fact reversed a series of 30-year gains in moving away from our dependence on fossil fuels. But that's not the end of the story, in a sense, because the largest consumer of fossil fuels has recently become China. China took over the world's largest role of fossil fuel consumption in about the year 2006 or 2007, depending upon how you calculate it. So the question now becomes China and humanity's transition. Will China succeed where the West has failed? The West, in this sense, is both the United States and Western Europe, in fact, all Western countries. So we want to look at this question of, will China succeed where the West has failed? Now, the human predicament is not just national at this point. It's not just the Americans or the Europeans or the Chinese. It's in fact the entire human community that faces a desperate need for a transition. You may recall what that transition is, and it was stated pretty clearly at the UN not long ago. Take a look. We're a fossil fuel dependent civilization, independent of what nationality you are. Our modern civilization is dependent on fossil fuels. We have to get to being a solar sustainable system. There's a bit of a transition, right? Transition studies are what's now in every discipline, every department, every university. Well, maybe in the universities and in any knowing society, but our political leaders haven't always caught up on this issue. Some of them seem to have extraordinary insight while they were in office. Every once in a while, they made speeches, even before Congress, on the fact that in America, we are addicted to oil, and called it a real problem. Take a look.
America is addicted to oil, which is often imported from unstable parts of the world.
Yes, we hear that America is addicted to oil. The president has said it.
I know it came as a shock to some to hear a Texan stand up there in front of the country and say, we got a real problem. America is addicted to oil. But I meant it, because it's a true fact, and we've got to do something about it now.
Well, this is interesting to me for a number of reasons. First of all, he speaks with conviction in part not because he knows a lot about oil, but because he knows about addiction. He was an alcoholic, and a recovering alcoholic. As a president, he declares the U.S. state of affairs as one of addiction. That should carry with it a certain amount of conviction, especially if he says it to important bodies like the Congress, because he knows something about addiction and the difficulty of getting off addictions. In addition, he makes this statement as a member of my generation. In fact, he was a classmate of mine at Yale as an undergraduate in class of '68. It's extraordinary for this kind of confession to come out in front of Congress as it does. According to him, the best way to break the addiction is through technology. He said so to Congress. You'll hear him repeat it. Take a look.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
George W. Bush wants to dramatically increase ethanol use, and he's called on Congress to mandate higher production levels.
America is addicted to oil, which is often imported from unstable parts of the world. The best way to break this addiction is through technology.
The best way to break the addiction is through technology. Well, perhaps. Take a look, though, at the technologies he suggested. Fox News covered his tour in America of ethanol plants. Take a look.
Biodiesel, ethanol.
The leaders of the world's two largest producers of ethanol, President Bush and Brazilian President Lula da Silva, have signed a new agreement to share technology in order to increase ethanol production. Brazil has already replaced 40% of its gasoline demand with ethanol made from sugarcane. Over the next 10 years, the Bush administration is trying to replace 20% of the U.S. gas intake with ethanol, largely made from corn.
U.S. ethanol producers receive a 51-cent per gallon tax credit, as well as subsidies for growing corn that totaled $9 billion in 2005.
Well, you can see why the corn-producing states would like that. And after Bush, Obama came to office maintaining those subsidies because he came from a corn-producing state. It was really quite extraordinary. He got his support from Midwestern farmers who loved the subsidies in order to try to make the transition from fossil fuel petroleum to ethanol fuel for the American fleet. And you got sort of images like this of corn being stuffed in the gas tank in one way or another. And then in the Midwest and elsewhere you began to see ethanol making up larger and larger percents of the mix of the gas-ethanol combination. E30 is 30%, E85 is 85% ethanol. And there were, among the enthusiasts of this transition, a feeling that we could become free of the importation of fossil fuels from around the world because we could produce what would be needed to keep our fleet moving from corn production. And it even got depicted in terms of the petroleum tank, as it were, being pumpable from corn itself. Ethanol E85 was 85% ethanol, only 15% gasoline, and it was touting itself as a substitute then for America's dependence on petroleum-based gas. But the techno fix for our addiction to fossil fuels leads to other bigger problems, and we found that out fairly quickly because there was a speculation that emerged very quickly on the price of corn. A lot of investment then made by people who want to benefit from the government subsidies being given to that corn and corn production of ethanol. So there was a rush into corn, so much so that a lot of corn production was taken out from the food stream to the fuel stream, with disastrous repercussions worldwide. It was Lester Brown who highlighted the global nature of the problem. Take a look.
The grain it requires to fill a 25-gallon SUV tank with ethanol will feed one person for a year. And so what we're beginning to see now at the global level, for the first time ever, is direct competition between the 860 million people who own automobiles and want to maintain their mobility, competing for grain with the 2 billion poorest people in the world who are simply trying to survive.
Lester Brown is an author and environmentalist. He believes the ethanol boom could create unprecedented global insecurity.
It's reached the point where it's really distorting reality in a way that can be very damaging over the long term. My own sense is we probably should have an embargo on the construction of any more ethanol distilleries until we get a chance to see what the effect is going to be of those that are already in production and the number that are under construction.
Right. An embargo on this whole approach, this techno-fix to our fossil fuel dependence. Very important statement, because it was at the time that prices in global food were doubling and tripling within a few months. It was these price hikes to urban food supplies in all of the countries around the Mediterranean that led to the food riots that eventually inspired what's been known as the Arab Spring. The collapse of one regime after another in the face of popular protest because the price of food had doubled in 2008, 2009. Well, can China help humanity get beyond fossil fuels? We're told that, in fact, it's the new innovative economy, and we're looking to it, in a sense, as a salvation for what the Western world has not been able to achieve, a graceful transition to a sustainable future. The documentary called Green China Rising makes this point again and again, emphasizing that China has its own reasons for wanting to transform its economy to a green economy. Take a look.
In the war to save our planet's future, the battleground is China, the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, a country fighting a frightening number of environmental battles. It's up against toxic rivers, polluted air, extreme weather events, melting glaciers, encroaching deserts, and a massive and growing population driving breakneck economic growth and runaway emissions. Climate change isn't a threat here. It has already struck. But China is striking back with innovative solutions other countries can barely dream of.
China's really pushing the envelope in every way. How fast we can build it, how much we can build, how clean it can be, how efficient it can be. They're really coming up with radically new technologies, just omnibus in every single way. They're going after the whole enchilada.
What's happening in China today is changing the global balance of power and potentially averting environmental disaster. This is the story of how a polluted China could save not just itself, but also the world. To really understand the vast scale of the problems facing China, you have to get an idea of just how enormous it is. 1 in every 5 people on the planet lives there, more than the population of North America and Europe combined. China's energy use has grown rapidly over the past 30 years as economic reforms have opened the country up. Every hour in China, 1,800 new cars are manufactured. Every minute, 480 tons of trash are thrown away. And every second, 100 tons of coal are burned. But today, the average Chinese still only uses 1/5 of the electricity the average American uses. If all the people in China moved to a US lifestyle, the energy chart would explode.
Would explode. And that's the question. What happens if all the people in China start to move towards consumption habits, expectations of growth, expectations of purchasing new equipment, new consumer commodities, and new forms of energy? What if they go in that direction that the West has been encouraging them to go for the last several decades with the expansion of trade and the like? What's the hope for humanity. Can China help humanity get beyond fossil fuels? It's not clear, because much of that growth in China that's been made possible so far, and that is being counted on by the Chinese public and now the world, because we've all become market partners with China for many of the things we've become accustomed to purchasing, either cheaply or at vastly reduced prices from what our own manufacturers can produce. All of that depends on an energy stream that is still quite dependent on fossil fuels. Take a look.
Whether the world can go green is the single biggest challenge this generation faces, and China's dead in the center of it.
Julio Friedman is a leading scientist and technical expert on how the U.S. can work better with China on clean energy.
We cannot avoid environmental collapse unless China aggressively pursues and achieves a new green economy. And that's why this partnership gets me up every day. It's the single biggest thing we have to do.
Standing in the way of China's push to go green is one formidable enemy: the world's biggest, dirtiest coal industry. Every year, China burns over 3 billion tons of coal, over 3 times the entire production capacity of the United States, and over half of the coal consumption of the entire planet. China's vast coal mines provide the fuel for the nation's economic juggernaut and the worst environmental headaches.
Coal is simply the lifeblood of the Chinese economy, period. 70% of their energy in total. They have the 3rd largest coal reserves in the world, after the United States and Russia. It is their indigenous inheritance. It's what they got.
Burning coal creates the notorious smogs that choke China's cities and much of the mercury and other toxins that contaminate its rivers and land.
Coal is a horror, but it's cheap and it's plentiful.
Thanks to burning coal, China now produces 1/4 of all energy-related climate-changing emissions globally, and now it's pushing up the temperature of the entire planet.
The burning of coal is the #1 contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. If we as a globe cannot resolve this problem, we have real problems for the planet, we have real problems for the atmosphere.
Okay, well, you get the idea. China has become the #1 emitter of carbon, but it does this through the burning of coal. Now, you would think this would galvanize the thought process around the world. China, stay off the coal, get off the coal, move off the coal. In fact, try to move off fossil fuels altogether. Because the greenhouse effect isn't just produced by coal. It's produced by natural gas and petroleum, the oxidation of fossilized carbon. But coal is the worst culprit. And it's fantastically ironic that just as China's beginning to think about how to get beyond their dependence on coal, the biggest historic emitter of carbon, the United States, is moving back to revival of coal under its new president. Staggering.
But change is coming, and on a scale that's hard to grasp. China is building a new coal-fired plant every week. That sounds like bad news, but there is a silver lining. The good news is that most of these new plants are state-of-the-art facilities, much more efficient than the older polluting plants. Jonathan Watts has been living in China and working as an environmental reporter for a major newspaper for 8 years, and recently literally wrote the book on China's struggle to go green.
These are gains in efficiency, but the gains that come from efficiency are being outweighed by the expansion of the economy.
Now, this is crucial. China is switching from coal to natural gas, and even petroleum is more efficient than coal. So there's a fuel switch process going on, and as he says, this amounts to gains in efficiency. But, as he also points out, gains in efficiency are being outstripped by the expansion of demand. In other words, it doesn't do you any good, certainly in getting off of fossil fuels, to become more efficient if you have to use more of the other kinds of fossil fuels to meet the demand. You're still going to be, in effect, behind the game, because you're going to be emitting more and more carbon from different sources, perhaps more efficient sources, but still more and more carbon, and you're not catching up with the process of getting off of carbon. Let's hear it again. I mean, the phraseology is crucial here.
Jonathan Watts has been living in China and working as an environmental reporter for a major newspaper for 8 years, and recently literally wrote the book on China's struggle to go green.
These are gains in efficiency, but the gains that come from efficiency are being outweighed by the expansion of the economy.
In Shanghai, energy demand has tripled in just 20 years. The Chinese government is desperately looking for cleaner, proven alternatives to coal, and they may have found some. Out here in the middle of the ocean, 350 kilometers southeast of Shanghai, a drilling operation is going on to pipe natural gas to the cities of the East Coast. Natural gas is proven to be up to 50% less polluting than coal. Primeline is a company focused on offshore gas exploration in the East China Sea. In 1994, Primeline successfully acquired a license and entered into a partnership agreement to explore for oil and gas with the China National Offshore Oil Corporation, or CNOOC. 14 wells were drilled by the likes of Shell, Texaco, and Exxon with no commercial discoveries. Primeline was next up to drill the 15th exploration well, and the rest is history. CEO Ming Wang has been overseeing the operation for more than 10 years.
So far, we are the only international company to discover commercial quantity of oil and gas in the East China Sea basin.
Okay, the only one to find commercial exploitable oil and sea gas. But what happens? US is going back to coal, and China, in effect, isn't getting beyond fossil fuels. It's just switching to a new kind of fossil fuel. So can China help humanity get beyond fossil fuels? Not yet clear. China and humanity's transition. Will China succeed where the West and the rest have failed? Can we get beyond fossil fuels? Not without a new kind of alliance on a global basis between citizens and scientists.
This is Noam Chomsky, and you're watching Cambridge